So I will introduce our next speaker because that is a perfect segue. Dr. Tanya Harrison is a geoscientist who has worked in science and mission operations on multiple NASA Mars missions over the past 13 years, including Opportunity, Curiosity, and Perseverance rovers, and the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. I understand her specialty lies in geomorphology, so the study of a planet's evolution based on its surface features, and it speaks to how our understanding of Earth landscapes and processes better can then be applied to understanding other worlds. And as Gord mentioned, vice versa, right? There's a nice reciprocity in learning about other places on Earth. So Tanya considers herself a professional Martian. But on Earth, she is a respected thought leader in the commercial space sector from her previous role as director of research for Arizona State University's New Space Initiative. And she currently works as the director of science strategy for the federal arm of the Earth observing satellite company Planet Labs. Tanya holds a PhD in geology with a specialization in planetary science and exploration from the University of Western Ontario. And she's an advocate for advancing the status of women in STEM and for increasing accessibility in the sciences. Tanya, I welcome you to describe this non-linear career path in your presentation.
Thank you so much. Let me share my slides here. There we go. And Dr. Osinski's talk was actually a really great segue into some of the things that I'm going to be talking about in mine as well. So thank you, Oz, for the unintentional setup there. I'm going to be talking a little bit today about my nonlinear career path into my current position here at Planet and how I started out actually working on Mars, and how you can use that to maybe make some decisions in finding your own career path in the space industry or the space sector in general, not necessarily on the industry side. I have been interested in space ever since I was about 5 years old, thanks to things like Star Trek and the Magic School Bus. But in particular, I really wanted to be like Geordi. I thought it was really cool, the idea of actually working on a spaceship. And so I think early on, my thought was, I really want to be an engineer. But as I got a little bit older, I realized that I don't actually have much aptitude for building things or physical things. I was much better in terms of science, the way my brain just worked. But the thing that really honed me in on Mars specifically from just space in general was watching the Pathfinder mission land on Mars in 1997. And Pathfinder brought along with it the little microwave-sized Sojourner rover. And the lander actually took this series of images of Sojourner driving off the lander platform and onto the surface of Mars, and released this as an animated GIF back at a point in time when animated GIFs weren't just a thing that were all over the internet. And I thought that this was absolutely amazing that we had the ability to do this. And so I knew that I actually wanted to work specifically on Mars rovers. This was my goal at the age of 11. But I didn't really know how to go about doing that. My thought was planets are in space, so I should be an astronomer, right? So I went to the University of Washington in Seattle, which has a really great undergraduate program in astronomy. But I didn't learn until maybe the end of my junior year that if I wanted to study Mars specifically, I should have actually gone into geology. So this was a little bit of a curveball, but I didn't want to stick around at the university for an extra year and pay them another year of tuition to get another degree on top of astronomy and physics. So I went ahead and continued with an astronomy degree, and I made the switch to geology in graduate school. And this is where I started to have a lot of thoughts about what are the things you should actually study based on what your interest is in space. So Oz mentioned before, there are a lot of options if you are not a scientist or an engineer. There are still ways for you to get involved in space. But for me and my specific interests, these were the sorts of things that I was thinking of. So astronomy, I learned from being an astronomy major, was really great if you want to study things like exoplanets and planetary formation specific to planetary science. Of course, there's all the other stuff related to astronomy, like the evolution of the universe and galactic formation and black holes and string theory and all that kind of stuff. But this, I'm talking specifically about planetary science. Geology, which I would have been happy to learn a little bit earlier in my undergraduate career, would have been great to study planetary surfaces, so things like geomorphology. Geophysics is really great if you want to study planetary interiors, and then engineering is really good for mission instrumentation. So I knew that my interests overlapped with geology and engineering, but at this point I had already taken some classes like electric circuits labs for my physics courses and realized I was not adept at being an engineer. So I made the switch to geology and went into a master's program instead of going directly into a PhD, which had been my original plan. I was going to go into an astronomy PhD program, but I decided to switch out to a master's in geology as sort of a transition period so I could get that knowledge that I didn't have from being an astrophysics undergrad. And this gave me the experience that I was really looking for. I got to go out and get my hands on rocks. I got to start learning how to analyze satellite imagery, both of Earth as well as of Mars, because I was focusing on some specific areas on Mars for my analysis, looking at how certain layered deposits on the planet formed. But by the time I finished my master's, my graduate school experience was not fantastic. And so I decided that I wasn't sure I wanted to continue on to get a PhD at that point. But this left me with kind of a dilemma. I didn't know what you could actually do with a master's degree in the sciences, specifically to be able to study space. I knew that if you wanted to be an engineer, there are a ton of industry jobs out there. But if you were a scientist, what could you do other than research and teaching? And so this was 2008. The new space industry didn't really exist yet. SpaceX was barely a thing. We didn't have all these companies that were launching satellites or building satellites outside of sort of the traditional realm of, subcontractors building things for NASA. So I just started cold emailing people that had written papers that I had read about Mars for my master's work to see if anybody had suggestions on what I could do for a job. I knew that even though I wasn't a good engineer, I was really good at data processing on the science side. And so I was just kind of seeing if anybody needed like a data processing lackey for maybe mapping work that they were doing. And one of the people that I contacted pointed me toward this company called Malin Space Science Systems in San Diego. And they have built a ton of cameras for planetary missions, mostly for Mars, as you can tell from this gigantic list. But they also built cameras for the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter and the Juno Cam. So if you've seen any of the amazing images coming back from Jupiter over the last few years, those are all from cameras that were built by this company. They don't really count as a new space company because they've been around since about 1990, but it is a very small company of, when I was there, 30 people. I think now it's about 50 people. But I never would have thought to look here on my own because I would have assumed a company building cameras didn't need anybody other than engineers. But I happened to go to their website after this person recommended it, and they were hiring for an assistant staff scientist where they wanted someone with a master's degree in geology to target cameras on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. This was just sheer luck in terms of timing, but I immediately applied. I kept hounding them relentlessly to let them know that I was still interested in the job because the hiring process was very slow. And eventually I got hired. And I started out working in mission ops for the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter on a couple of different cameras, the context camera or CTX and the Mars color imager or MARCI. And this was the first image that I ever got to take of Mars with CTX. This was absolutely surreal. It was really hard to believe that basically 10 years after my dream of wanting to operate robots on Mars, I was actually getting a chance to do that. And then eventually that also evolved into working on rover missions since we built cameras for Curiosity. And so I got to work on the mass cameras, the Mars hand lens imager, which we use to take the selfies of Curiosity like this one, and the Mars descent imager, which is the one mounted on the belly of the rover that took pictures as it was coming down, which was used to make a landing video. Not quite as cool as the one we saw from Perseverance more recently, but really cool for 2012. And one of the things that I did for the Mars color imager, this is a camera that takes a global mosaic of Mars every single day at 1 kilometer resolution. And it basically takes images in a constant strip from pole to pole as it's orbiting around the planet. And we stitch them together to make views kind of like this so that we can monitor the weather on Mars. This is really important for the health and safety of missions on the surface, like the rovers, and it helps us plan operations for the satellites in orbit of Mars because, if there's a big dust storm in the way, for example, we don't want to try to do really sensitive imaging because the signal to noise of the cameras is not often good enough to really see through the dust to see the things on the surface you might want to see. And we have such a limited bandwidth when it comes to sending data back from Mars, we really want to prioritize. So here you can see there's not much of the surface visible right now. This was one of the global dust events back in 2007. So here we would have prioritized imaging over the few places you can see, like these dark spots poking out here, these are the tops of the giant Tharsis volcanoes. They almost pop out the top of the atmosphere when it comes to these dust storms, so you can still see them. And we did a lot of imaging of the South Polar Cap because it's also very high altitude, so you can kind of still see what's going on even when you have these big dust events. But getting to work on Marcy like this got me really interested in the idea of change detection, because before I started working on these missions, I had no idea that Mars was such a dynamic planet. Usually you just see photos like the one behind me, which is a mosaic from the Viking missions in the 1970s. And you don't get this idea that Mars has weather and clouds and storms and all these things happening constantly. I mean, you could see here, this is like every single day for the course of an entire Martian year. There's constantly something happening. And so my job was between this and CTX to document certain types of changes on the surface of Mars. And this really led into some of my future career options or career decisions I'll talk about in the coming slides. After a few years at this job, for many reasons, I decided to go back to school and get a PhD. One of those reasons was because I was running into a lot of academic elitism at conferences when I would go to present some of the work that I had done on these missions, and people would ask where I did my PhD, and I would tell them I didn't have one. So I got kind of frustrated with that attitude and decided to go back and get a PhD. And I ended up at Western. Before it was actually the Institute, it was just the Center for, oh gosh, it's been so long, CPSX, Center for Planetary Science and Exploration. So it's awesome to see that it has upgraded to an institute now. And I actually worked with Gordon Osinski as my advisor. And I worked on gullies on Mars and looked at gullies in Houghton Crater as an analog for Mars. And so I got the chance to work on some really amazing things. Like this is a picture from one of the Canadian Space Agency Mars analog missions that we did. I got the chance to keep analyzing satellite data, both from Earth and from Mars, to try and look at these gully features and understand how they form on Earth and what that could tell us about how they might have formed on Mars. And I'd had this long-term goal, again, since I saw Sojourner land in '97, that I wanted to work on these missions. And at some point, I decided I really wanted to be the principal investigator of a mission or an instrument to Mars. And until Perseverance, there had never been a woman that had been the PI of an instrument or mission to Mars. So my goal for a while was actually be the first woman to do that. And then an opportunity that I never expected came my way that completely derailed that career path into something totally unexpected, but ended up taking a lot of the skills that I had learned from Mars and applying it here back to Earth. I got a call one day from Arizona State University, sometime in the last year of my PhD, offering me a position with this new thing that they had started called the New Space Initiative. And this was a project where the university was looking to make partnerships between the commercial space sector, government, and academia to specifically look at this agile aerospace, like entrepreneurial space sector, to help drive scientific development and technological development and work on space missions and collaborate on things like that. They wanted somebody that wasn't looking for a traditional academic career path to become a professor and somebody with industry experience. And so coincidentally, someone that I had worked with at Malin back in the day immediately thought of me because they knew that my plan had been to go to Western, get a PhD, and then maybe go back and work at JPL or something like that, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory for NASA. That particular person sold this job to me as, this is a really great way to survey the entire landscape of the space industry and figure out what jobs are out there and what you might want to do and get the chance to network with all of those people to do it. I said, this sounds great, I'm in. It also meant that I had to finish my PhD in like 4 months instead of the extra year that I was planning on taking. So that was a very stressful 4-month period of time, but it was totally worth it. And in this job, I learned of this company, Planet. And they really intrigued me because they were kind of doing for Earth what we were doing on Mars with Marcy. Their goal was to launch this huge constellation of Earth-observing satellites that are about the size of a loaf of bread to image the entire landmass of the Earth every day to look for change. I had no idea, as someone who had spent their entire career on Mars, that there was a company trying to do that here on Earth. And so I thought they were really cool. There was something about the corporate culture that really appealed to me and just the goals of the company. And so I applied for a few jobs, didn't get them because they were very focused on things like engineering. So instead I applied for their Science Ambassadors program. And so this is me with some of the other Science Ambassadors when this program was around. And I was using the data at ASU to continue my research in the gullies of Houghton Crater to look at how they changed over time as an analog for Mars. But eventually, Planet, I kept applying for jobs. I wasn't getting them because they didn't really need a scientist. And so through the Science Ambassadors program, I started just networking with people at the company. And my goal became, I'm going to convince you all that I am cool enough that you should hire me, even though I'm a Mars scientist, not an Earth scientist. But I realized very quickly, too, that everything that I had learned from spacecraft operations at Mars and satellite image processing and satellite image interpretation was completely applicable to the Earth. I had also learned a lot of skills in terms of like talking to industry, talking to the government, and talking to academia through my role at New Space. And so eventually, when Planet got a contract with NASA, they needed somebody to kind of head that up that could speak all of those languages to translate between Planet, NASA, and these academic researchers. And so they called me up and offered me a job. And I said, yeah, this sounds great. So like Oz mentioned before, Planet images the entire landmass of the Earth every single day. We downlink about 25 terabytes worth of data. It's an absolutely insane amount. And just to give you an idea of what that looks like, this is 1 day's worth of coverage on the Earth with Planet. So this is a lot of data. And we image the entire landmass at about 3.7 meter resolution. So this is extremely high resolution data. And we use this to look at a lot of things changing on the surface. So this was the Milne ice sheet collapse off Ellesmere Island last summer. And NASA actually called us to take a look at this because they didn't catch it with the Landsat satellites due to clouds. We can image surging glaciers on like a day-to-day basis in these specific events because we're constantly imaging the planet. We don't have to target the satellites to image these things. We're just looking at the whole planet every single day. We can look at seasonal changes in high latitude lakes. So this is, I believe this is in Alaska, but the study is from Sarah Cooley at Oregon State University. And she's also looking at lakes across Northern Canada in this same study. So it's been really amazing to take all of this stuff that I learned as a planetary scientist and now get the chance to apply it to Earth and work with researchers across a broad array of research topics, you know, not just in Canada, not just in the Arctic, but anything you can possibly think of anywhere in the world. There's probably somebody that's using Planet data to do it, which has completely blown my mind. And I never would have expected to end up in a career like this, having spent all of my career before this on Mars, but realizing that I had transferable skills and being willing to take that risk and jump toward a new opportunity to something that was new and unexpected has really paid off because I absolutely love what I do now. And it's just been a really amazing opportunity. So in order to navigate your career path, the biggest tip I can give you is to be proactive. So, you know, I chased down Planet to get this job. I chased down Mail and Space Science Systems to get hired there. I sought out trying to figure out what degree program I should go into to actually study the things that I wanted to study. I got out there and networked with people, and that is such a huge thing that is necessary to get through this field. And then being genuinely enthusiastic while you're doing that pays off because people will remember you and be like, oh, this person is really excited about this thing. I'm personally invested in trying to help them. Highlight your strengths and think about any skills that you have that are transferable, even if you're trying to make the move from one field to another. Market yourself as if you're a business because you're the one that's going to pitch yourself better than anybody else can. Seek out the opportunities and then be prepared when they are there and then just go do them because you never know what kind of thing that might come up in your options is actually something that might be really exciting. And it turns out to be something that you'll fall in love with, even if it's not what you expected from your career going into it. So don't be afraid to jump on those because you might end up somewhere really incredible.